Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Kevin Bowling and I'm with the Secular Student Alliance. And we're really pleased to have Thomas Lecaque here. He is the Associate Professor of History at Grandview University. Trained as a medieval historian, he works in the intersection of apocalyptic Christianity and political violence from the medieval to contemporary world. That's a nice long span. He's written for the Washington Post, Religion Dispatch, and a lot of other venues. And we're very, very happy to have him here with us today. So Thomas, thank you for being here. And I'm gonna let you just take it away.
All right, thank you everyone so much. Good evening. My thanks to the Secular Student Alliance for having me, and thank you all for being here. Now, I would love it if I were here to talk to you about something pleasant and light and fun, but if you actually looked at the title of the talk, that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about Christian nationalism and gun violence, which is unfortunate, but something that is deeply relevant. Let me prep my PowerPoint just so I can actually have the images, because of course, why not have horrible things to show you in addition to everything else? So we're going to talk specifically about the gun culture that exists and grows and spreads around Christian nationalism, right? So Christianity, like all religions, contains multitudes. This is a religion that embraces the idea of the Prince of Peace of Isaiah 9:6, as well as think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword, from Matthew 10:34. Contemporary Christian nationalism, however, has fully embraced a rhetoric of violence and control, an ahistoric narrative of a Christian nation that has always been and must be maintained by whatever means necessary. Now, that narrative is backed by a lot of things, and we could go all kinds of different directions talking about it in the Q&A. There is an entire branch of pseudo-history designed to bolster this image. There is the political machinations that go into electing Christian nationalists into office, and especially putting them in the judiciary branch in order to maintain this by legal means. But there is also a sacralization of guns, literally the idea of the gun as a sacred tool. And this is spread into a lot of genuinely weird areas. This exists in memes, it's in TikTok, it's in sermons, it's in political speeches and advertisements. It's in liturgy, it's in churches, it's in the weird use of bullet rosaries by some branches of far-right Catholic groups. It is the AR-15 as a holy weapon to championing gun violence itself as a tool of holy war. It's the idea of the martyrdom of Ashley Babbitt as she stormed the Capitol on January 6th. So what I want to do is look at a handful of examples to get kind of a taste of it, and then open it up to broader questions and see what aspects of this interest you. So I want to start with a pop culture example. In addition, I teach and I write in a couple of different areas, and one of my favorites is that I work on the margins of game studies, the academic study of video games. So I'm teaching a class this semester on the video game Fallout New Vegas and the legend of the American West. And unfortunately, the rhetoric around this abounds in this kind of idea of the gun as a tool of God's divine will. Right, our entire pop culture apparatus around the American West really has kind of weird intersections between Christian nationalism and gun violence. Manifest destiny, which is a term that I assume you've heard if you're my age or older, maybe through Schoolhouse Rock, otherwise hopefully it's something that's covered in your classes. Manifest destiny is effectively a doctrine of Christian nationalism, the imposition of an ideology of American dominance gifted by God over native lands. It's the imposition of Christian missionaries, Christian ideology, and Christian space on the landscape. It's the building of frontier churches in the heart of frontier towns on land stolen from sovereign nations via actual violence, the physical imposition of the US military on native lands, the breaking of treaties, of missionaries protected by the US cavalry as they ravaged their way across the plains and into the mountains. It's also the blasting of American presidents into the sacred Lakota site of the Six Grandfathers, in the stolen land of the Black Hills, the Hey Papa, the heart of everything that is, the heart of the Lakota cosmos, as Nick Estes describes it in his book, Our History is the Future, which I highly recommend. Gutzon Berglund, the sculptor of Mount Rushmore, was also the originally chosen sculptor for Stone Mountain in Georgia, the memorial to the Confederacy pushed by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. the entire mythos of the cowboy, not the real actual people who went and herded and fought and lived in the plains, but the mythos that we build around the idea of the cowboy is a neo-medieval knight errant, the lone hero with his sword, well, revolver or rifle, this isn't a Baz Luhrmann film, righting wrongs for God and country. So Fallout New Vegas is a video game that, based on the name, shockingly takes place around Las Vegas in a retro-futuristic post-apocalyptic landscape. And if you're not familiar with the Fallout video game series, it's effectively the idea that 200 years ago in this kind of semi-Buck Rogers in the 25th century world, there is a nuclear war, and all of the games take place about 200 years after in the blasted radioactive wasteland that is America. There's very little discussion of religion across the series, and really a shockingly small amount. But New Vegas has a kind of extra campaign, what we call a DLC, a downloadable content, that focuses on it. Now, this campaign is called Honest Hearts, and it takes the player to Zion National Park to fight alongside or against a series of what they call tribes, and that's a problematic term in a lot of ways, alongside a pair of Latter-day Saints white savior figures, a missionary named Daniel and a former military leader named Joshua Graham. So this is where I want to come back to kind of contemporary Christian nationalism, because video games, like movies, like TV series, like music, pop culture deeply impacts the way people interact with the world around them, right? People draw on the tropes in video games, in films and things like that, and use them to reinforce pre-existing ideologies. There is a far-right love affair with the film 300 that has bled into this kind of weird obsession with Spartans, not real historical Spartans, but Spartans as presented through this film version of a graphic novel depicting the Second Persian, Greco-Persian War, right? It's that kind of multiple layers of history kind of removed from it that sell particular ideology. Video games do the same thing. So Joshua Graham in this video game is a former military legate of the kind of game's villain, Caesar, who runs Caesar's Legion, which is a very aggressively fascist organization intent on enslaving and destroying all of their opponents and noted for crucifixions and slave camps and like things that should on their surface level be seen as very clearly bad. After military defeat, he's coated in burning pitch and thrown off of the Hoover Dam, surviving to crawl back to New Canaan, this post-apocalyptic Latter-day Saint settlement, where he's welcomed as the prodigal son. Caesar's forces track him down, they destroy New Canaan, and he appears in Zion, sworn to a holy war, prepared to destroy the enemy, tracking him, covered in bandages, constantly in pain, constantly cleaning a gun. Now, he spends his time cleaning his own sacred weapon. Let me just make sure that this is there. Back one. There we go. His own sacred weapon, a customized Browning .45 pistol, which he names a light shining in the darkness. You can see part of the Greek script here. It's from John 1:5, and the light shineth in darkness, and that the darkness comprehendeth it not, which is also used throughout the LDS kind of scriptural book, Doctrine and Covenants. Now, the .45 pistol in this game is claimed as the weapon of his people. It was invented by John Browning, who was an LDS gunmaker from Ogden, Utah, which is where this fictional town of New Canaan in the future is supposed to be. And we'll get back to this kind of inscription on gun parts. This is an important part coming up for the real life examples of it. But the part that's really disturbing is that there is a weird Christian nationalist trend of taking this video game figure, Joshua Graham, and using him as an inspiration for real life belief and practice. And I wanted to share one aspect of you. This video has 2.8 million views, and it's a compilation of quotes from the video game cut together to provide a semi-theological narrative. And this is not the worst of them, but this is maybe the one with the highest number of views. So I'm going to make sure that the sound is shared, and we're going to watch this.
There is much to be skeptical of in this world, so it no longer surprises me to learn how many people don't really believe in anything. What's the point? For many of us, the road is a difficult one, but the path is always there for us to follow, no matter how many times we may fall. The good news is that we can help you find your way back, naturally. Some days are harder than others, but I must try. We all have doubts. The light of the mind alone cannot burn away all darkness. Think on it and look in your heart. It will be for the best. When the walls come tumbling down, when you lose everything you have, you always have family. The fire that had kept me alive was love. Their love. God's love. Right. You're not so certain. Fair enough. We all go through periods of darkness. Of course, in a world filled with misery and uncertainty, it is a great comfort to know that, in the end, there is light in the darkness. In such times we can turn to the Lord, but it's good to have friends. And the good Lord knows there's much to be done here. You're a good neighbor to us. Thank you. Until then, God be with you.
Now, the weird thing about this is that this character then proceeds to literally engage in holy war and massacre his way through his opponents, leading to a final scene where he brutally executes the leader of the opposing group in cold blood after murdering his way through all of them. This figure that is then used as this kind of exemplar of Christian values because of his rhetoric in the game ends by leading bloody, brutal massacres against his enemies. And the people who make these kinds of videos are well aware of that, while also simultaneously holding him up as a paragon of virtue, despite the fact that he's a video game character. TikTok's hashtag Joshua Graham feed has 4.5 million views. There's a video from someone called the Burned Pepe, whose TikTok page is a cornucopia of what we can unfortunately call Christ-pilled videos, has one specifically about the virtue of Joshua Graham as an exemplar. And I'd highly recommend, if you have time, read Tess Owen's article in Vice News from July on Christian fascist propaganda on TikTok. It's worth reading because this kind of use of new media is kind of a big deal. So this gun is in a kind of big tradition of fantasy and video game things, is this special named weapon. It is a sacred weapon. This is not just a thing that comes out of video games. The use of weapons as sacred objects has a long history in Christianity. Guns as holy weapons is, of course, new because guns are relatively new. But the idea of kind of sacred weapons is as old as imperial Christianity. So there are examples of holy lances across the Middle Ages. They could be the spear of Longinus that supposedly pierced the side of Jesus on the cross. There's the mythical spear of Constantine, forged from the true nails, wielded by the Ottonian kings of Germany as a battle standard. There's the Holy Lance of Athanasius, possibly kept in Antioch, that when used to scratch the side of an icon of Christ called the Icon to Believe, that people on the First Crusade claim to have found. This is the example on the left is from a Crusade manuscript depicting the First Crusade with the Bishop Adhemar of Montreuil, the Bishop of Le Puy, and Papal Legate, holding the cross as a relic. The image in the middle is the Holy Lance kept in the Church of Echmedzyaden in Armenia that claims to be that same lance. The one on the right, I think, is the Holy Lance kept in Vienna. There's also the kind of epic literary tradition of medieval Europe. If you've ever read the Chanson de Roland, this kind of glorious militant French epic of the noble knight Roland, the kind of favored warrior of Charlemagne, who wields a sword called Durandal that is filled with relics that was bestowed to him by the angels, and as he's dying, he attempts to shatter it lest its power fall into the hands of his enemies. The best known of these is probably Arthur's sword Excalibur, that grants him invincibility in battle, this idea of a magical sacred weapon. Now, these are all totemic, maybe practical, but kind of symbols of God's favor in battle. Magic weapons, by and large, have not translated into contemporary Christian nationalism. But the symbolic value of them, signs of God's favor, signs of being in God's service, has. So let's get back to the idea of kind of Bible verses on a gun. So if this kind of fictional game gun seems absurd, let me introduce you to the Crusader rifle made by Spikes Tactical. This was my kind of gateway into this particular realm of Christian nationalism and sacred guns. And it's actually worth dwelling on this one a little bit because it is a gun that every single aspect of both its manufacture and the narrative that the gun maker has built around it screams a very particular narrative. So the website for the gun itself, Spike Tactical's website, describes it this way. Spikes Tactical created a balanced, reliable rifle that would bring an excellent fighting rifle to people of all abilities and resources. The Everyman Fighting Rifle. We named it Crusader and engraved Psalm 144:1 on the lower receiver to hoist the flag of our faith and to make a statement, reminding our customers that we are with you. The war is here. We have a duty to defend our homeland and our way of life. Now, Psalm 144:1 that you can see there on the gun reads, "Praise be to the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." And it continues on, "He is my loving God and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer, my shield in whom I take refuge, who subdues people under me." Right? This is a war psalm. This is not an innocent verse. This is a war psalm. And this is all bad enough. By itself, without anything else, that description of a gun is concerning. Why do people of all abilities and resources need an excellent fighting rifle? Right? Why? Why, you might ask? Well, it's because the war is here. This is an incredibly ominous thing to say when selling a gun, especially an AR-15. You do not use an AR-15 to hunt. This is not for trap shooting. This is a gun meant to kill people. That's what an AR-15 style gun is designed for, right? The idea of we have a duty to defend our homeland and our way of life is a very specific set of arguments, right? This is arguing that our homeland and our way of life is under attack. And you're naming your gun the Crusader, right? This is engaging in a very specific rhetoric of Christian violence. Now, the gun also has some flourishes. It features a engraved Templar shield logo opposite the psalm right here. It has 3 settings on it. They are the safety, single fire, and semi-automatic, but they're named Pax Pacis, peace, Bellum, war, and covered up, Deus Vult, or God wills it. Now, the Templar shield and Deus Vult are things that come out of the actual Crusades, the area where I kind of got my start academically, but they have been appropriated by the far right to sell a specific narrative of Islamophobia, white supremacist Christian nationalism, like these very specific narratives that the far right adores. And I say this not just because, using a Templar shield or using Deus Vult automatically means this. In 2015, a company spokesman, when talking about this type of rifle, said that putting this Latin phrase in the Templar shield and the psalm, that this ensures that no Muslim terrorist will ever pick up this weapon and use it to bring harm against another person. That's actually my favorite part of the rifle. Now, this is complete nonsense, right? Muslims aren't vampires. This gun isn't a mirror. It's not a clove of garlic. This is not kryptonite. This is not Muslim kryptonite. It's a gun. But that narrative actually says a lot about the mindset of Spike Tactical when they put these things on it. The idea that this gun, named after the holy wars waged by Latin-speaking Catholics against Muslims, Jews, pagans, and other Christians from about 1096 until they finally ended in 1798 with the dissolution of the military order of the Knights of Malta when Napoleon conquers the island. So this is a 700-year-long holy war. Is both a weapon for Christians to hoist the flag of our faith and make a statement, and apparently also secretly anti-Muslim kryptonite is a whole mess of Islamophobic Christian nationalist ideas in a single object. This is a gun that then is not just a gun to the people making it. This is a statement about a particular narrative of what our homeland and our way of life means and who's excluded from it and who is brought into the fold. Now, it's also a marketing gimmick, right? It doesn't just have to be one or the other. This is also absolutely a marketing gimmick. Their line also includes an AR-15 style rifle named the Spartan. It's more on the nose than some of them, right? It is very much playing around with specific tropes that are popular with specific groups. Apologize for the cough. The use of religious rhetoric to sell firearms is by no means limited. You may be familiar with the firearms manufacturer Daniel Defense. Their weapons were purchased by the mass murderer in Uvalde, Texas. And on May 16th, they put up this image on their Twitter account, which they've since deleted. So the verse up there is from Proverbs 22:6. It makes a particularly uncomfortable example of a broader trend in selling firearms using biblical passages for an expressly Christian and expressly militant context. But this idea of training up a child the way that they should be, this is a father explaining to a kid how to put together an AR-15 style rifle as being part of a godly and American parenting aspect, right? This is a idea of Christian masculinity that is problematic in a whole host of ways. As Brad Stoddard has written in Peace for Religion Dispatches, AR-15s are also increasingly the firearm of choice for Christian gun owners who arm themselves, in their minds at least, in defense against both tyranny and evil. And this kind of marketing scheme is part of that. So I'd like to switch over from the commercial application to explicitly religious contexts in which firearms and bullets have become religious symbols for Christian nationalists and related groups in this country. We're going to come back to the AR-15, which unfortunately has enough capital for us to dwell on kind of for a while. But I want to start with something else, that there is a broader tradition of sacred weapons that goes beyond kind of evangelical movements and exists kind of a much wider spread within Christianity and especially within Christian nationalism. So I want to take the example of far-right Catholic groups and the bullet rosary. These are literally rosaries made out of bullets. Now, there is a World War I model behind this, right? The thing about a lot of these symbols is that I'm not going to argue that these symbols are by themselves harmless, but it's the taking of symbols that have multivalent uses and then drawing them into a far-right context and then perverting the meaning is unfortunately a big part of the way far-right Christian nationalism operates. Bullet rosaries have a World War I tradition, as soldiers in the trenches were making rosaries out of the shell casings they had at hand. And there's something kind of somewhat beautiful and noble about this, right? I mean, World War I is a mess of competing ideas, but the idea that you're using what you have to make tools of prayer as you are about to die, because trench warfare is simply a mass casualty event waiting to happen time and time again. And the rosary itself is an important tool for prayer and a symbol of spiritual warfare, which is different than physical warfare, right? And whether or not you believe in spiritual warfare is really kind of beside the point. It is absolutely normal within Catholic and Christian tradition to engage in spiritual warfare of prayer to effect actual change. That's not what the problem with the bullet rosary is. Daniel Panton wrote a piece for The Atlantic in August titled How Extremist Gun Culture is Trying to Co-opt the Rosary, about how there is a far-right appeal to bullet rosaries alongside AR-15s and a branch of radical traditionalists who are calling for a rebuilding of a church militant, not in a peaceful manner, in a call for a Lepanto moment. Lepanto being the famous battle in 1571 where the Holy League defeats the Ottoman Turkish fleet in this kind of miraculous crusading battle, right? The idea that Catholics are being persecuted, and especially radical traditionalist Catholics, the true believers in the Catholic Church, are being persecuted, that a new church militant needs to step up to push back against it, not armed, not just for spiritual combat, but physical combat as well. And the problem with this is that there are a lot of groups being brought into this discussion, and some of them are well-intentioned and some of them are not. There is a widespread, I'd say, QAnon-adjacent movement within some of these groups that is trying to broaden their appeal by latching on to kind of the pushback against the traditional Latin Mass. We could go into the weeds. Feel free to ask about it. We can go into the weeds then. The right-wing backlash against this piece was kind of shocking in its scope. And I expect pieces about kind of Christian nationalism to get pushback, but it was shocking that like Fox News latched onto it. Bishop Robert Barron of the Diocese of Winona, Rochester in southern Minnesota, who is informally known as the Bishop of Social Media, had kind of a video that he released against this article. It even got an attack during the last weekend of the 54-day Novena for Our Nation, a subtopic that I need to delve into more. But this was a group that described itself as, and I quote, "We, the church militant on earth, are engaged in a spiritual battle of historic proportions. We continue to live in peaceless times in conflict with God's law and his natural law, denial of the humanity and human rights of the unborn, rebellion against God's creation of man and woman, attack on marriage and family, intolerance towards and persecution of biblically based religious belief and practice." So this is an organization engaging in spiritual warfare in service of a right-wing ultra-conservative agenda that then attacked this piece about it. One of the organizers specifically called the piece out. This is in October about a piece that came out in August. So like it is still living, to use the parlance of the internet, it is still living rent-free in the minds of some people. The radical traditionalist website, Church Militant, also wrote against the piece, specifically using Lepanto as part of their justification, saying the Holy League used it, the rosary, as a weapon against the Ottomans at Lepanto 300 years later. An unlikely upset victory for the Catholics was immediately attributed to the power of the rosary. Ever since, the anniversary of that battle at Lepanto has been celebrated as the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, formerly as the Feast of Our Lady of Victory. This is full-blown Crusader rhetoric. Right? Lepanto is a victory of an officially sanctioned crusade, and that kind of motif is alive and well, be it Templars or Crusaders, Crusaders on rifles, Crusaders in memes, whatever else. This is a kind of a topic we could go into at great length elsewhere. But the part that's interesting is that all of this militant rhetoric, not just spiritually militant, but physically militant rhetoric, and all of this pushback completely ignores the point of the article, that there is a group within far-right Catholic spaces championing the crossover from spiritual warfare, a venerable part of Christian tradition, back into physical warfare. And that's a real concern. So having said that, let's go back to the AR-15. Retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin made headlines in 2014 for saying that, and I'm going to put up the full text for you. The Lord is a warrior, and in Revelation 19, it says when he comes back, he's coming back as what? A warrior. A mighty warrior leading a mighty army, riding a white horse with a blood-stained white robe. I believe that blood on that robe is the blood of his enemies because he's coming back as a warrior carrying a sword. And I believe now, I've checked this out, I believe that sword he'll be carrying when he comes back is an AR-15. Just let that sink in for a moment. Let's just let that wash over you in the worst possible way. Now I want you to think about this. Where did the Second Amendment come from? From the Founding Fathers, it's in the Constitution. Well, yeah, I know that. But where did the whole concept come from? It comes from Jesus when he said to his disciples, now if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. I know, everyone says that was a metaphor. It was not a metaphor. He was saying, in building my kingdom, you're going to have to fight at times. You won't build my kingdom with a sword, but you're going to have to defend yourself. And that was the beginning of the Second Amendment. That's where the whole thing came from. I can't prove that historically, and David, and by this he means David Barton, will counsel me when this is over, but I know that's where it came from. And the sword today is an AR-15, so if you don't have one, go get one. You're supposed to have one. It's biblical. Now, I like to hope that I don't actually have to explain to you that this is not true. That is not where the Second Amendment comes from, that none of this is accurate. But this is kind of a big deal. The David mentioned there is David Barton. He is an evangelical activist and author who founded a group called Wall Builders that is a pseudo-history peddling group that advocates for an evangelical understanding of America in text and in law. And he's been described accurately, in my opinion, as a Christian nationalist, because what his group pushes is a narrative of the Black Robe Regiment and revolutionary pseudo-history for contemporary politics. The idea that America was deliberately founded as a Christian nation, and a Christian nation as understood in contemporary terms, and promulgates texts and resources that advocate reimposing that narrative of Christianity into law and governance today. That's his entire thing. He's not the only one. There's kind of a large group of people who push this narrative that America has always been a Christian nation, that it was founded on specifically Christian grounds, and that those Christian grounds have to be defended at all costs. He's simply the biggest and most organized of these groups. Now, Boykin's comments shouldn't be unexpected. He has a long history of militant Christian rhetoric, including explicitly anti-Muslim comments when he was the Deputy Undersecretary of Military Intelligence under the Bush administration. And this is a wider-ranging thing because there are a number of people who served in the military, served in campaigns and time periods where our primary conflicts were in either Middle Eastern or predominantly Muslim countries that have come out of this as full-fledged Christian nationalists, from former Washington State Representative Matt Shea, who made news for his biblical basis for warfare pamphlet, and for the fact that the two of the sons of his men's group ministry leader were arrested and killed with Patriot Front, topic for another time, to Alan West, who recently joined a Knights Templar cosplay organization, to Jerry Boykin and others. But this is a thing. The idea that the AR-15 is a biblical weapon, well, that one has some deeper ramifications, and unfortunately is not limited to Lieutenant General Boykin's comments. So we'll get back to this kind of apocalyptic version, but I want to take a look at one of the examples of this that on the outside seems kind of funny, right? In June, GOP Representative Lauren Boebert spoke at the Charis Christian Center's family camp meeting. Her talk gave a couple of memorable internet moments, and I think that we really underestimate the way that the memes that we spread about that make us laugh about the kind of people's biblical interpretations, the way Christian nationalists talk about history and religion, are actually very, very serious things. So I'm going to play you a clip from this meeting that we can then discuss.
We lose by default. Now, cancel culture is something that's been kind of a big deal lately. However, cancel culture is nothing new. Cancel culture has been here since the very beginning. Cain canceled Abel. And guess what? It wasn't with a big scary AR-15, it was with a rock. So I don't think it's a firearm issue, I think it's a sin issue. On Twitter, a lot of the little Twitter trolls, they like to say, oh, Jesus didn't need an AR-15. How many AR-15s do you think Jesus would have had? Well, he didn't have enough to keep his government from killing him. So...
Right. Oh, Jesus didn't need an AR-15. How many AR-15s do you think Jesus would have had? Well, he didn't have enough to keep his government from killing him. Now, on its surface, this is completely ridiculous, right? We know this is completely ridiculous. She knows this is completely ridiculous. Obviously, AR-15s didn't exist 2,000 years ago. If Jesus of Nazareth had somehow had one and shot his way through the Roman legions and was never crucified, there goes the passion, the resurrection, Christianity. But that's not what she's saying. She knows that, right? This is an hour into her talk, and it's a talk that I think we love to share these kinds of clips that make for easy laugh tracks while leaving out the narrative. This is an entire talk that is building Christian nationalist grounds on a specifically kind of pseudo-American history model with a lot of actual use of biblical verses, and then a couple clips like this that make for really easy to share moments. She knows what she's saying. This is the same talk that she invokes Psalm 109:8 on President Biden using the line, "May his days be few and another take his office," to cheers and applause. That leaves out the following passage, Psalm 109:9, "Let his children be fatherless and his wife a widow," because that is also a war psalm, just like Psalm 144. And they know what they're saying. The conversation about Jesus and AR-15s is not about Jesus then. It's about Christians now. A good Christian is an armed Christian and one who should be prepared to fight the government. That's the message that's being sold with this AR-15. That's the message being sold with the Crusader AR-15 style rifle. This is a fairly standard Christian nationalist line at this point. If you want examples of Christian nationalist rhetoric directly deployed against the government, I highly recommend the Uncivil Religion Project, which looks at the religious iconography in the crowd on January 6th. So this is a longer form thing. So I want to move back to the slightly less standard line. Boykin's idea of the AR-15 as a literal weapon of the apocalypse. Get out of the video. There we go. So meet Pastor Hyungjin Sean Moon. He's the co-founder and leader of the World Peace and Unification Sanctuary Church, better known as Rod of Iron Ministries. Pastor Moon is the son of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. He's the founder of the Unification Church, the group that you probably know of as the Moonies. They've been in the news recently. Not only has Donald Trump and members of the administration spoken at several Unification Church events, the assassin of former Japanese Premier Shinzo Abe cited the church's predatory donation tactics as his motive for assassinating the former prime minister. Hyung Moon is Sun Moon's youngest son. He lost a power struggle with his mother over the church, and he built a schismatic sect. And you can just see from the pictures on screen here, the hodgepodge of beliefs that go into this. It is the same apocalyptic framework as the Unification Church. It's got a heavy dose of QAnon, Christian nationalist imagery, rhetoric, and ideology added in. They have a constitution set up for the Messianic kingdom they believe will follow the collapse of the United States. Their website opens with a call to defend freedom versus the Second Amendment. You can see the gold-plated AR-15 on his desk, the gigantic bullet, the crown made up of bullets, and just as an added bonus, just for me, a Templar statue on his desk. Oh, they performed ceremonies wearing crowns and parading around with AR-15s. Rod of Iron is a gun church with long-standing and ever-growing ties to the far right. From the Newfoundland, Pennsylvania base, where they first gained notoriety for processing with AR-15s in a mass wedding ceremony, just days after 17 students, teachers, and staff were murdered in Parkland, Florida in 2018. They've expanded. They have bought a 40-acre compound they called Liberty Rock in Central Texas, another one in Granger County, Tennessee, where they plan on building a training center. At the blessing of that latter property, the administrator for the new property, Greg Naal, said that we believe that the kingdom of heaven is a kingdom of armed citizens. So we believe that everyone in the kingdom should be armed and that the gun really does represent strength, peace through strength. If you have a gun in self-defense, the criminal or the predator will back off. And if you don't have a gun, the predator comes in and ravishes you or us as a nation. Rod of Iron is just one of the most averted, the apocalyptic Christian or Christian-adjacent religious movements that proclaims the AR-15 as a gun that matters on a spiritual level. It's not a slippery slope, though. This idea of these ideas of the gun as a sacred weapon, of anti-Muslim verses, add-on to weapons, of processions with AR-15s, of calls for a new Lepanto or a new holy war. It is not a slippery slope from this kind of rhetoric to the violent language scrawled all over the Christchurch mosque shooters' guns. And some of these were very modern symbols, the Black Sun, Alexandre Bissonnet and Luca Traini's names, but some were specifically holy war references. Sebastiano Venier, who was a Venetian admiral who fought the Ottomans in the 16th century. Cyrillic inscriptions to a 1770 victory by a small Russian force over the Ottomans, another to Serbian soldiers who fought against the Ottomans. Toul 732 and Charles Martel, John Hyundai, David the Builder, and David Soslan of Georgia, and other kind of medieval figures popular among the far right for their fights against Muslim forces. These were all written all over the magazines and guns of a mass shooter who adopted the rhetoric and trappings of the kind of far right on his guns as he proceeded to carry out a massacre. Now listen, there's not a direct line from Fallout New Vegas to Christchurch. Thank heavens, or whatever else you want to thank for that. And while I think we need to be deeply concerned about the rhetoric of holy war and sacred violence that accompanies the far right sacralization of weapons, thankfully, it is not a one-to-one link between bad memes on the internet and mass shootings. What I am most concerned about, though, is the normalization of this kind of rhetoric. The idea of guns as sacred weapons, of guns as apocalyptic weapons, guns as holy weapons, guns as biblical weapons. It is the normalization of holy war. We are rightfully concerned about the normalization of anti-Semitism, of anti-Muslim language, of anti-LGBTQIA+ language, of anti-democracy language. We need to be concerned when Christian nationalists are normalizing other rhetoric to the parts that feel more subtle, more subdued, less kind of overtly attacks on the nations of marginalized groups. Normalizing the idea that a good Christian is an armed Christian with the type of weapon that exists purely to kill other people in the largest numbers possible is dangerous and it's scary. And paired with the rest of their beliefs is something that we should be following and concerned with and blocking anywhere we can. Thank you so very much.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. So if you, the Q&A time, so if you have questions, please feel free to throw those in the Q&A tab there. We sort of talked a little bit earlier before this started, and I said the amount of comments we received on social media just with the image of this talk, and the number of older white men who just were randomly, posting we're being anti-Christian, this is complete BS, where is this coming from, and lots of very colorful language. But when you said the normalization, that sort of really struck me, because this is people who I assume identify as Christian, but when they see Christian nationalism, they automatically assume that it's talking about them. And that to me is just, as in the same regard that's dangerous.
I think that it's the unfortunate part of the way Christian nationalists are actually trying to infect kind of broader Christian rhetoric. The idea that Christian nationalist is simply a title we apply to all Christians, and consequently it's the villainization of Christianity as a whole, which then becomes this narrative of oppression that doesn't actually exist on the ground, right? Like, people are not actually oppressing Christians in America, right? That's not happening. Like, they're sorry, not real. But it is part of the selling point, this idea that, oh, Christian nationalist is not a term that has specific meaning. They're just trying to oppress all of you. Well, no, we would like to see people who want to build a theocracy not take power, right? Most people don't want, I hate to use the Handmaid's Tale example of Gilead, but it's unfortunately one of the ones that has the most kind of pop culture currency, that this is not the thing that we want, right? The reason that we have freedom of religion in this country is not because most of the colonies were not Christian. It's because there is a large-scale concern by all of the different Christian denominations that if one of them ever takes control, they will impose their values on everyone else. And no one who is not a Puritan wants to live under Puritan rule, right? It's that kind of idea. This is the actual bedrock, that no one wants someone else's vision of religiosity imposed upon them. And one of the questions in there, Alice, your question, do you know what result is desired when the Christians rise up against the government? That's actually a super interesting question, because the problem is that there is not an easy answer to that, because what Christian nationalist groups, Christian nationalists and other far-right groups agree on is what they dislike. And if they ever successfully overthrew the government, there would be a civil war among all of these competing groups that all want to impose their own vision with deep-seated doctrinal differences. I think that there is a degree to which, you know, the kind of coalition with far-right Catholic groups and far-right evangelical groups would break down immediately, because anti-Catholicism has very deep roots in America, right? And some of your more secular, simply white nationalist groups would be deeply concerned about the idea that any of these Christian groups get to hold power. I mean, they're allied in who they hate, not in what they want on the other end. And many of them don't articulate a vision of the future. It's the accelerationist, we must destroy what exists now. And that's just a whole mess of time.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things was just a recent article talking about Christian students in schools, evangelical Christian students particularly, who are feeling overly discriminated against and oppressed in their own schools. But the things that they cite as examples are really things that we're talking about in this, and not as, you know, it's the speculation, it's not actual things that are actually happening.
I think one of the things that's really, really interesting about trying to get through to people on this broader topic is that I think there is a degree to which there is an entire rhetoric around oppression that people may or may not feel in their own lives, but they deeply believe is happening, right? I think that it's really easy to live in a information vacuum, right? We consume media in very particular spheres, and we have a narrative that gets reinforced for us all the time about the ways in which we are under attack, right? And that's true for people on all sides of the political spectrum, depending on where you're getting your news. It's just, some of that is real, and some of that is a fictitious narrative, right? So if you are trying to deal with this kind of particular narrative that evangelicals are somehow being oppressed, you have to ask yourself in what way? In what way do you feel and experience oppression? And that's really hard. So one of the questions from Christina, how can we counteract this on their level? Is there a message that can be used to get through to an evangelical apart from divide and conquer? I think it's the part where you have to ask, like, where are you actually experiencing oppression in your own life, right? In what way, not in what are you being told is the way you're being oppressed. Where do you actually experience oppression in your own life? And that's a part that you don't really get an answer to, right? In what way is the boot of the government by giving other people rights and freedoms? Where's the boot on your neck in this moment, right? No one is asking you to do things personally other than be respectful to other people and accept that other people exist. But that's not actually the rhetoric that is being fed to them, and that's a really hard thing to get through to, because they're being fed a narrative that, like, the government is going to force these things down your throat. And whether or not they experience it individually, this is a rhetoric that gets reinforced through every media landscape. This is all over social media. This is all over, I mean, you know, if you're going to a far-right church, this is being fed to you from the pulpit, right? This is something that is constantly playing on far-right radio and news media sources. The idea that the government is going to impose X, Y, and Z thing on you. But dealing with, like, where you actually interact with this, no one is asking you to transition your gender. That's not a thing. We're asking you to stop trying to convince the trans community to kill themselves because you're trying to reduce the quality of their life to an intolerable level where death seems preferable than continuing to live, right? We are asking you to stop killing people, right? Are you being forced to check out books from the library? No, you're not being forced to check out books from the library, but these books that exist in the library help people choose to live, right? I think it is hard asking people to have respectful conversations on these grounds, because to a certain extent, there is a very hostile rhetoric that is being promoted. But I mean, people like me, I'm a white cisgender man, right? Like, I am not oppressed in any way, shape, or form. I should be having these conversations with people about, like, why do you feel like you're being oppressed by these things that don't touch your life in any way, shape, or form? And I think it's unfortunately the process of de-radicalization very much is this kind of beginning with the personal contact of like asking like, where is this in your life that you are feeling oppressed by this and why? And unpacking like how does this impact you and how does this not impact you? And that's really hard, intensive work. De-radicalization is really hard work. I am fundamentally not trained for it, and most of us are not. But starting with those conversations of finding a common place like, hey, how does this hurt you? And starting from that point is the best guess that I have.
That makes sense. One of the other questions was, how much crossover do you see sort of between this Christian violence, the Christian nationalism violence, and sort of white nationalism?
This is one of the tricky parts because the lines that run through white nationalism and white Christian nationalism are blurry, right? There are groups that are overtly Christian nationalists and their rhetoric and framing are explicitly theocratic. Right, the idea that priests should be advising the government, that church should be running the state. There are groups that are really overt about that. And there are plenty of groups who have a more kind of nebulous white ethno-nationalism that is informed by narratives of either of kind of white Christianity, but are not necessarily as overtly Christian. And it's a matter of nuance in academic study. I think that sometimes I wonder if it really, like, it matters because the rhetoric is different and it matters because the state aims are different. Kind of all of them want to overthrow the government. And so like sometimes it's, you know, the differences don't matter as much outside of the academic study. But like a group like, say, Patriot Front, which is a aggressively, very blatantly white nationalist organization. I mean, like they're a fascist movement. Let's just call them what they are. They literally parade around with an American flag that's replaced the stars with a literal fasces, the axe wrapped in sticks that is the symbol of the fascist movement. Like these are people who are very overt in who they are. Their idea of America is informed by a narrative of white Christianity, but their bedrock stance is ethno-nationalism. This is a white country for white people, as opposed to this is a Christian country for Christian people. And the practice of, if they ever took over, of what that would mean, I don't know how different the nuance would be because none of them really explain what happens after they win. But that's kind of the bedrock difference. Is it primarily an anti-immigrant, anti-people of color movement? Is it primarily an really anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-secular movement? You know, who are they targeting first?
Again, some great questions. Aaron says, do you believe gun reform in the U.S. is essentially impossible within the established channels, including the Democratic Party at this point? And I think that's what you pointed out, with the overwhelming corporate influence of weapon manufacturers in the domestic United States.
I refuse to ever be hopeless about these things. I'm just going to say that it would take some significant, how political to make this answer? It would take some significant victories in the midterms in ways that I want to be more hopeful for than I am. We could talk about why they would need to be so significant and gerrymandering and the whole structured mess of that. But I think that there is more willpower towards gun reform than we think that is being blocked very heavily on largely partisan lines. And like I wish I could say it in a way that did not feel so explicitly partisan, but like you look at the voting records and that's just what it is. That's just what it is.
Gary said, besides Boebert, are there other dangerous political leaders, in this that could have easily been incorporated into your talk?
I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we all like to laugh about because she builds quips deliberately for social media engagement that involve mockable phrases while spreading super dangerous messages. I think that we think that they're the fools and we're the fools, right? We rapidly disseminate every nonsense statement a Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert says, and they're doing it very deliberately so that we spread them while leaving in coded, deeply dangerous conspiratorial things. Marjorie Taylor Greene would be one. Gozer. There are a bunch of them. They're primarily in the House of Representatives or on the state level. Carrie Lake should terrify us. Blake Masters. no offense to Arizona. I'm speaking doing a webinar for Secular Arizona next month, but like, no offense to Arizona, but they have people who scared the Jesus out of me. Wendy Rogers in Arizona, who also spoke at the America First Political Action Committee thing. Basically, everyone who spoke at AFPAC are people who should terrify us. They also love a rhetoric of lynching that should. I mean, Lisa, yeah, I'm so sorry. You were absolutely spot on. There are people running in Arizona who are the most extreme examples of this possible.
Yeah. So there was a question, just you mentioned a book in the beginning of your presentation. One, if you could, what book did you recommend? And there's been some other things, some other comments all the way through. Like, are there other things that you would recommend, books or articles to read as well?
Okay, so I'm a huge fan of Nick Estes' Our History is the Future. You can tell from the number of tabs how much I am enjoying this book. I'm teaching in a class right now. The book that I universally recommend to everyone on every media appearance I'm ever in is Kelly Baker's The Gospel According to the Klan. That is all about taking the Second Klan's Christian nationalist rhetoric seriously. If you buy one book, buy Kelly's book. It is a brilliant book. It is why I started working on contemporary topics. But it's all about the Second Klan's appeal to Protestant America on specifically Christo-fascist lines. If you read through their documents, they are an explicitly Christian nationalist organization. And honestly, the Second Klan is the closest parallel to the movements that are happening now that you're going to find. All of the other examples we like to draw on are fun and interesting and worthwhile. But what we're seeing in groups like QAnon is the resurgence of what made the Second Klan so dangerous, a 50-state, multi-province in Canada-wide organization on white Christian nationalist grounds, appealing to anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, racist lines, calling for this kind of rebuilding of a narrative of American history on explicitly Christian nationalist lines. Alice, it's Gospel According to the Klan. Let me just put it in here. It is Gospel There you, thank you, Stephen. That is exactly it. It's a great book. I mean, like, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. Buy it, read it, be horrified.
I've been listening and not paying attention to questions, which I'm normally so much better at. Related to the comment about the Patriot Front as a fascist organization, and the fascism inherent in Christian nationalism, how do you address someone who is otherwise an ally but responds to the patriots or fascists as just about economic policies?
This is going to be harsh, but if someone is saying that Patriot Front, if someone claims that Patriot Front aren't fascist, they're not an ally. Patriot Front is aggressively overt with their fascism. Not only their rhetoric, but their imagery is as aggressively fascist as any group could conceivably be. They literally parade with a fascist. Their manifesto draws line from straight Nazi propaganda. They are literally branching out. They literally branch off from Vanguard America after the Unite the Right rally, taking the lessons that maybe if you just stop screaming out blood and soil, but also cover your face so you don't get fired, you can pull off neo-Nazism more effectively. And they are very aggressively neo-Nazis in any way, every way, shape, and form. Sorry, I am trying to type while also answer questions here while also talking on here. I'm getting the first one. All right, it's Our History is the Future. Mark, it's Our History of the Future by Nick Estes in the chat as well. This is the problem with some of these groups. Some of these groups are incredibly overt, and when people try to argue with you about whether or not they actually are these groups, it's a really bad faith argument. So.
Well, and they're becoming more and more overt. I mean, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene is like, yes, I am a Christian nationalist, and everyone should be. Like, this is very simple. And I think just within the last couple of days, you know, if the GOP gains back the House, you know, the Speaker of the House better be prepared. She has to, you know, to deal with her, and she's going to have power. So I mean, they're setting the stage for this, you know, easily politically within the GOP party.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that's interesting, McCarthy said today that if the Republicans take the House, they'll cut off aid to Ukraine. And I think that's interesting about this is that Putin is selling an international version of Christian nationalism in this kind of very aggressively culture war sense in a way that actually doesn't make any sense in Russia, but it's designed for an international effort of selling a narrative of culture wars and Christian nationalism abroad. The fact that the Moskva was carrying a fragment of the True Cross, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet that was bombing the Ukrainian coast, was carrying a fragment of the True Cross. The Patriarch Kirill saying that any soldier who died would be a martyr, which, listen, the Orthodox Church does not believe in that. The Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus II Phocas tried this in the 10th century, and the Patriarch at the time slapped this down really hard as being blasphemous and against Orthodox tradition and teaching. Well, you get to 1,000 years later, and suddenly this is all well and good because this is a holy war. You have Russian actors / far-right activists advocating that the war in Ukraine is a holy war. Like, this rhetoric is amped up there, but it is being disseminated in a way that is meant for consumption here. Like, the message is being called out and it is being received, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I completely agree with you. We had so I know we've had a lot of questions about the books. So we will send a copy of this video out. It is being recorded. We will send this to everyone who registered, so you'll receive this. Please feel free to share that. We'll also touch base with Thomas and get go through the chat, but also get as many of the books as we can. We'll have links to those so that you have that information as well. Anything else that I know there's a few more questions left that have been popping up as I've been talking. Anything else that you want to sort of address, Thomas?
That last question, the idea that if you're in rural America, then guns and country have to come first. I'm from small town Missouri. I'm from the rural Midwest, right? This is where I come from. This idea that this is the main geographical center where Christianity and gun culture coalesce. The thing that I love about Kelly Baker's book is that actually a lot of these people are like middle-class people living in the suburbs, right? That we like to think that this idea of Christian gun culture has to come from rural areas. And this is a narrative that gets pushed, that this is the heartland, that this is the real America. But the people pushing this are well-educated, wealthy people from big urban centers who are pushing a particular narrative that gives them a vehicle for power, right? It's your giant megachurches in the suburbs of major cities that are pushing this kind of narrative of dominance and control. And they're trying to bring a lot of people with them by making an argument of a real America that is small town, rural, church, hunters, things like that, because they think that that's who they can grab to join them. And when we decide to acquiesce to this vision and then reinforce that by saying that this is who's following it, we are falling into their trap, and we should be fighting them on that front too, right? This kind of particular rhetoric doesn't actually go along well with hunters, right? I teach in Iowa, and there are lots of people who are from small towns who think the idea that everyone should have an AR-15 in their house is weird, because you can't hunt with it, and because it only exists for a particular reason. And there is no reason to have expand magazines unless you're planning on murdering a bunch of people, right? We can push back on aspects of this by refusing to accept the grounds of engagement that they want to play with. We can be fighting them on our territory, not theirs.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's the intentional normalization of this. So people who identify as Christian now, when they hear the buzzwords about Christian nationalism, are automatically feeding into it and not even realizing that that's not what they believed 5 years ago. Like, yeah. it's a program. I talk about with my parents, like, stop watching Fox News. You're just getting sucked in further and further. You don't even realize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we could go on forever. I want to respect your time and the time of everyone else is here. But thank you so much, because I would say I try to keep up with Christian nationalism, and this just put an entire, unfortunately, scary layer that I'm going to have to think about on top of it, not even realizing how deliberate and inbred and just, this is. So thank you so much. And yes, we will be sending out the information to everyone who registered. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening, and good luck to us all.